Hello, and welcome to the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's Introduction to the State's Draft Rail Plan 2050. We'll get started in just a moment with an introductory video about the rail plan before we move to a question and answer period with WisDOT's rail plan experts later in the session. Welcome, and thank you for your interest as we initiate the public review period for the Draft Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050. I'm Matthew Sorensen from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, Bureau of Planning and Economic Development, part of the Division of Transportation Investment Management. Over the next 20 minutes, I will share information about the status of the draft Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 and review a few key plan topics and the evaluation and analysis that was completed over the last 2 years. I will discuss the financial implications of the draft plan and explain the process for providing public feedback, whether that feedback is a question about the information provided in the draft plan or a comment to be considered for the final rail plan. I'll end the presentation with a short review of next steps and a description of how comments will be captured and compiled to inform the final stage of plan development. Before I describe the details of the draft plan, I would like to share a few logistical items with you regarding your participation and feedback. WisDOT encourages you to provide comments or questions, whether you're viewing this video in a live webinar session or watching a recording of a webinar that has already taken place. If you are participating online, please know the presenters cannot see or hear you. To share your questions or comments with the presenters, please use the comment form on the right-hand side of your screen to provide feedback. If you are using a mobile phone with video capabilities to view this video during a live webinar session, you will find the comment form on the bottom of your screen. The comment form will be available once the webinar has opened for questions and comments. If you are calling into a live webinar session without video capabilities, please send your comments or questions on the draft plan via email to dotwirailplan2050@dot.wi.gov. The Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 will replace Wisconsin Rail Plan 2030, which was adopted in 2014. By adopting this plan, Wisconsin will meet the federal requirements set forth in United States Code Title 49, Chapter 27, which requires that states adopt a rail transportation plan in order to remain eligible for certain types of rail-related federal assistance. The Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 will help Wisconsin remain competitive for available federal rail funding now and in the future. Wisconsin's long-range multimodal transportation plan is called Connect 2050. Finalized and adopted in May 2022, Connect 2050 is a vision plan that identifies goals and objectives to guide development of an integrated, efficient, and safe multimodal transportation system in our state. The draft rail plan provides policies and actions for implementing rail-related goals and objectives identified in Connect 2050. Connect 2050 describes what we need to do to continue providing a safe and efficient transportation system in Wisconsin. The draft rail plan describes how Wisconsin will accomplish these goals and objectives as it relates to freight, commuter, and passenger rail. The draft rail plan provides an overview of rail activity in Wisconsin, including freight rail, commuter rail, and intercity passenger rail. The plan identifies rail priorities for WisDOT and includes an environmental evaluation, equity analysis, and rail-related safety considerations. The plan also includes a summary of financial planning and funding opportunities and an illustrative list of rail projects in the state. The Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 will be shaped through 5 distinct planning phases. Phase 1, kickoff. Phase 2, the pre-draft plan. Phase 3, the draft plan. Phase 4, the final draft plan. And Phase 5, final plan adoption. The kickoff phase included publishing a notice of intent and drafting a public involvement plan. The pre-draft phase included initial outreach and consultation, including with Wisconsin's tribal governments, to help scope potential plan issues and opportunities. Currently, the plan is in the draft planning phase, which includes a 30-day public comment period, after which WisDOT staff will review and consider all public comments received and revise the draft plan where necessary. During the final draft plan phase, a 45-day public review period will open. and a public hearing will be held. Stay tuned to Rail Plan updates for further information about the public review period and public hearing. Finally, after the final draft plan phase, the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 will be formally adopted by WisDOT and submitted to the Federal Railroad Administration later this year. Wisconsin's rail system supports both statewide and regional economic activity. The draft plan summarizes existing freight rail infrastructure and the major commodities that utilize that infrastructure to move goods into, out of, and through our state. The draft plan also summarizes current challenges and major capital projects. The draft plan identifies the 4 national, 2 regional, and 5 short line freight rail companies that operate in our state, transporting freight over Wisconsin's 3,200 miles of privately and publicly owned railroad track and 600 miles of publicly owned rail corridors leased by these companies. WisDOT has a long-standing commitment to transit services as a key part of a healthy economy. The draft plan and its support of commuter rail remains part of that commitment. The plan summarizes existing commuter rail services in Wisconsin and defines roles and funding programs necessary to continue planning for future needs. In Wisconsin, commuter rail is located in Kenosha, in the southeastern corner of our state, on the Metra commuter rail system. The Kenosha station served 350 daily passengers in 2018, offering 5 trains daily, Monday through Friday, and from 3 to 7 trains per day on the weekends. Metra is governed by the Illinois Regional Transportation Authority, and although Wisconsin does not provide state funding for Metra, WisDOT and Metra staff coordinate closely on safety and other rail issues. Intercity passenger rail also supports economic activity in Wisconsin, both regionally and statewide. Wisconsin's intercity passenger rail systems include Amtrak's long-distance passenger route, the Empire Builder, which has 6 Wisconsin stops from Milwaukee to La Crosse, the state-sponsored regional passenger route, the Hiawatha, which has 3 Wisconsin stops, 2 in Milwaukee and 1 in Sturtevant, and the Twin Cities Milwaukee-Chicago service, which when complete will connect Chicago to Milwaukee, Portage, Toma, and La Crosse on its way to Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. Amtrak's Thruway bus service connects many major Wisconsin cities to Amtrak's Hiawatha and Empire Builder rail systems. Nearly 90% of Wisconsin residents live within 30 miles of a rail station or within 15 miles of an Amtrak Thruway bus stop. The draft rail plan includes 13 policies and 53 action items grouped into 8 categories. Policies identify what WisDOT plans to do, and action items describe how WisDOT plans to do it. Among the 8 categories, safety and security is first and foremost. Other categories include the impacts on freight rail of connected and autonomous truck freight, investments in programs for intercity passenger and commuter rail, and long-term viability of rail corridors and the branch and short line network. The draft plan outlines rail plan policies in Chapter 1 and Chapter 10. The draft plan provides a qualitative analysis of potential environmental impacts, including benefits and burdens, resulting from the operations, maintenance, and future development of our state's rail network in Chapter 8 of the plan. This analysis considered system-level impacts with a conceptual focus on a statewide scale. It is important to note that this analysis does not replace future project-level environmental reviews, which may be conducted for future federal or state-funded projects. Project-level environmental reviews are critically important and may include strategies to avoid, minimize, or compensate for potential environmental impacts of future rail development in the state. The draft plan provides an equity analysis which assists WisDOT with identifying potential negative and positive impacts of railroads on equity groups identified under Executive Order 12898 and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The equity analysis also assists WisDOT to identify the needs of traditionally transportation underserved groups, such as individuals and families without access to a motor vehicle, those not able to or choose not to drive a motor vehicle, or who do not have reliable access to public transit. The plan's equity analysis will assist WisDOT in developing policies and actions that will help balance transportation needs with those of the environment, historic and cultural resources, and the needs of the people of Wisconsin. The draft plan also provides a system plan environmental evaluation as required under Trans 400.07 2B2 of the Wisconsin Administrative Code. This evaluation is required when proposals contained in a state transportation system plan, like the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050, are considered major and significant. A system plan environmental evaluation, or C, is more conceptual, qualitative, and general than environmental reviews for individual projects. The draft plan contains two scenarios. The first, a base case, assumes the continuation of existing policies and actions. The second, an implementation scenario, assumes full implementation of the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 and includes all existing, revised, and new policies. The C requirement is satisfied by chapters 8, 9, and 11 of the draft plan. The draft plan summarizes Wisconsin's railroad safety and security. WisDOT, freight stakeholders, federal and state agencies, partner communities, and all Wisconsin residents share responsibility for the safety and security of our state's railway. Railway safety and security issues include collisions and derailments, shipment of hazardous materials, trespassing, emergency response, assessing vulnerability, and driver crossing practices at grade crossings. The draft plan's safety considerations are located in Chapter 7. The safety of Wisconsin's railways, highways, waterways, and airways is WisDOT's highest priority. The draft plan addresses the amount of funding available from various sources and Wisconsin's ability to spend that funding in Chapter 13 of the plan. Federal funds that can be used on rail projects are generally administered through the Federal Railroad Administration, the Federal Highway Administration, and in limited cases, the Federal Transit Administration. Passenger rail improvements are often federally funded with discretionary grants, which are competitive and do not occur every year. State funding is allocated through Wisconsin's biennial budget process and with state bonding. Both state and federal funds are required to have budget approval and are appropriated to various transportation programs by the state legislature. There are a variety of federal and state programs that contribute to funding rail projects in Wisconsin. Federal programs include the Local and Regional Project Assistance Program, the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program, the Federal State Partnership for State of Good Repair Grant Program, and the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America grants. State programs include the Freight Railroad Preservation Program, the Freight Rail Infrastructure Improvement Program, the Transportation Economic Assistance Program, and safety programs funded through the Office of the Commissioner of Railroads. Funding programs are located in Chapter 12 of the draft plan. The draft plan includes illustrative project listing tables, which identify capital projects that are funded or anticipated to be funded, as well as unfunded projects and studies. The plan's project list will be updated as needed to reflect program funding cycles, discretionary funding awards, and other funded or unfunded projects. The project listing tables are located in Chapter 14 of the draft plan. Public involvement activities have been, and will continue to be, conducted by WisDOT during all 5 phases of the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050's planning process. Since 2020, WisDOT has consulted with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission Environmental Justice Task Force, tribal governments, and environmental resource agencies. WisDOT has also coordinated with Wisconsin's metropolitan planning organizations, regional planning commissions, the WisDOT Freight Advisory Committee, and hosted a freight rail conference, which included discussions of the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050. Upcoming public involvement opportunities can be viewed on the Rail Plan's website at wisconsindot.gov/railplan 2050. The public comment period for the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 is now open and will remain open until February 26, 2023. All comments submitted by the public during this time will be considered as the draft plan moves through the final phases of its development. If you would like to submit a comment or question to our rail plan experts during the live webinar, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit a comment or question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed by WisDOT's Rail Plan experts in the order submitted. If your question is not addressed during the live webinar, one of our team members will respond via email at a later time. On behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, I want to thank you for your interest and participation in the development of the Wisconsin State Rail Plan 2050. Now we'll begin our question and answer session, when you will have the opportunity to submit questions to WisDOT's Rail Plan experts. Joining us today are Alex Gramovat, WisDOT's Planning Section Chief, Lisa Stern, WisDOT's Railroads and Harbors Section Chief, and Rich Kedzier, WisDOT's Freight Railroad Program Manager. If you are ready to provide a question to our Rail Plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. Our first question is, what can the state do to help prevent the trains from blocking crossings for long periods of time?
This is Lisa Stern, Chief of Railroads and Harbors. I can take this question. So the railroads in are regulated by the federal government, and there's nothing really that the state or local governments can do to prevent a train from blocking or occupying a crossing as they're doing their regular operations. However, the FRA is currently trying to collect data on blocked crossings, and if you do have a blocked crossing that happens regularly in your community, I would strongly recommend you submit that to the FRA.gov blocked crossings website. It's a blocked crossing incident reporter, and they are collecting that data. Additionally, you can report it to the Office of Commissioner of Railroads here in Wisconsin. There is sometimes the one thing the department and the OCR together can do is reach out to a railroad, and sometimes we can work to maybe do some minor upgrades or even look to do some things where they can alter their operations to reduce the blocked crossings impact, but that's pretty much what we're limited to. So I'd really strongly recommend those being submitted to the FRA to be reported. And that's the end of my answer.
Our next question is, during the initial presentation, it was mentioned that the TCMC would have stops in Milwaukee, Portage, Toma, and La Crosse. Does this mean the current stop in Columbus will be eliminated?
This is Lisa again. I can take this question too. I noticed that as well. The crossing or sorry, the stop in Columbus will still be there. That was just was not included in the presentation. We must have missed it, but definitely the Columbus stop will be part of the TCMC. It will not be removed or eliminated. So it'll both have the Empire Builder stop as well as the new TCMC stop in Columbus. And yeah, that's the end of my answer.
While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I just wanted to remind attendees that if you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. Our next question is, how can the noise be managed by communities who have a train crossing?
This is Lisa. I can answer that question. So there's basically the way to manage noise is let me step back. The train horn is a federally regulated safety measure that the railroads have to do at crossings in order to kind of notify everybody that is in the area that the train is coming through the crossing. There is a program called the Quiet Zones or the Train Horn Rule that you can, as a community, apply for to the Federal Railroad Administration. The process is a bit onerous. I mean, you have to apply to the Federal Railroad Administration, then you have to have a diagnostic with the railroad, Wisconsin DOT, Office of Commissioner Railroads, the FRA, and other local stakeholders, either the local public works, sometimes the the first responders, whatever is appropriate for your community. Go out there, do a site investigation, determine what they call supplemental safety measures are needed. Sometimes there's some driveway closures, or because you can't have driveways or roads very close to the crossing, so they might have to be moved, medians, additional signals. So it can get kind of expensive what is identified in the diagnostic to be upgraded. And then as that's done, the community will submit it. There's a calculated process. It's very specific to it. I'm not an expert in how the FRA does it. And then they'll determine whether your community will qualify for a quiet zone. And then you have regular inspections after that to make sure you're continue to meet those requirements. But that, to get started, if you're interested, I would recommend Googling FRA quiet zone or train horn rule. And or there are quite a few communities in Wisconsin that have quiet zones. You could reach out to a neighboring community, or even your own local community may have a quiet zone in a different part of town, and see what the steps would be required to do that. And that's the end of my answer.
Our next question is, how will Rail 2050 support Wisconsin tourism?
This is Lisa. I can take a first attempt at the answer. Alex may have some additional comments. So I think there's not a direct support of tourism. I think, the freight is very specific to increasing shipping. You suppose it supports tourism by getting more trucks off the road, so that if a family wants to get to the Dells or up north by car, that will help reduce traffic. It also improves safety for those traveling. I think the most direct impact for tourism would come from passenger rail projects that are able to bring people directly to a community like Columbus or the Dells with the TCMC and Milwaukee. So that part would be a direct impact to tourism, but the other ones are just providing a safer, more efficient transportation system that helps all industries, including tourism. And that's the end of my answer.
Our next question is, the Hiawatha service continues to struggle getting sufficient equipment from Amtrak. Is there a mechanism in place to compel Amtrak to supply the cars they have absconded with to support their Keystone service and Washington State service?
Hi, this is Rich, and I'd be happy to try to answer this question. It's a bit complicated. In 2020, Amtrak, with service down and financial struggles, Amtrak opted not to overhaul a number of Horizon cars. And Horizon cars is the type of car that the Hiawatha service depends on. and normally we have 6 Horizon cars per train. Complicating that, so the Horizon car pool in the Midwest has shrunk. Complicating that, the Washington State Service, they have a state-supported service that connects Eugene, Oregon, to other communities in Oregon and Washington State, to Seattle primarily, and also going up to Vancouver, British Columbia. And they had some cars that Talgo manufactured cars that were involved in a crash a few years ago, pre-pandemic, and FRA and Washington State made a joint decision to pull those cars out of service along with Amtrak. And so some of the Midwest Horizon cars went to Washington State. So the also on top of that, Amtrak was expecting that the venture cars, the Siemens manufactured venture cars, would start arriving earlier than they have been. By now, all of the 88 venture cars should have been delivered to the Midwest. Unfortunately, not all of them have yet. And Amtrak made a lot of deployment decisions based on that Siemens venture deployment schedule. So currently the Hiawatha consist has 4 cars instead of 6, which seems to be sufficient mostly for now, except at the most peak, at the times of highest ridership. So there are occasionally some standing room only trains because we don't have the full 6-car consist. I will say though that passenger demand has not, on the Hiawatha, has not returned back to normal or back to pre-pandemic, just because of the change in the commuters, movement of commuters and other business travelers between Chicago and Milwaukee. And we don't know if that number, the amount of commuter and business travelers Monday through Friday, will return. So I think we had the highest ridership in 2019 at roughly 140,000 on the Hiawatha. Last year, calendar year 2022, is less than 600,000. Ridership is growing. We don't anticipate we will actually need that 6-car, maybe not until 2024. So in any case, we don't have the full 6 cars per consist, but we anticipate we might not need them quite yet. I hope that answered your question. Feel free to provide a follow-up if I didn't answer the question.
Rich, this
concludes my answer. Go ahead,
Rich,
Lisa.
this is Lisa. I just want to clarify. I think you maybe read the wrong number for 2019 was about 880,000.
Oh, it was
not 100.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we're around 600,000 for last year. So we're recovering, but like just as you said, as far as I just want to make sure that those numbers were clear.
Thank you.
Our next question is, have departure times for the TCMC in both directions, from St. Paul and Chicago, along with the stop times at the various stops along the route, been published?
This is Lisa. I can answer that question. So no, They have not been finalized or published. There is some basic information that was put out as far as the TCMC project for the infrastructure. However, we are working currently with Amtrak, Minnesota and Illinois to define and finish the actual route and when that gets started. So we're hoping to start that up sooner rather than later, but that the official for sure timetable has not yet been published. Let me know if there's any follow-up, but that's what we have at the moment. Thank you.
Our next question is, what is the impact of Wisconsin rail planning in 2050 to other traffic such as passenger vehicles and truck traffic?
This is Alex. I can speak at least to the passenger side. Maybe Rich can chime in on the freight side. But the point of this plan is to try to advance rail as a viable means of transportation for both people and goods. So the goal of it is to provide a viable option to things like single occupancy vehicle travel for some of those longer trips where appropriate, but also acknowledging that WisDOT's role in the process is fairly limited. So we are doing what we can from a regulatory standpoint to try to make sure that the funding is available for whoever might be trying to advance some of these projects, so that that funding can be used when the project is ready to move on. From a truck perspective, I know from some of the discussions that we've had with like our freight advisory committee that the viability of rail, depending on your industry, does change. And some folks would like to have more access to rail, but they have to work with those shipping companies on a one-on-one basis from their business. And we're also aware of things like autonomous trucking, truck platooning, and some of the potential impacts that could have. So one of our policies is actually to monitor autonomous trucking and truck platooning and try to analyze the impact on rail. I don't know, Rich, if you have anything more to add on the freight side.
Yeah, I would just add that we in the plan we want to emphasize that we do have these programs in place, the Freight Railroad Preservation Program and the FRIP Loan Program, and they are tools that will help us to increase capacity on some of the publicly owned lines. And when I say capacity, I mean gross weight capacity for rail cars. And I'll just give the example of what we call the Reedsburg subdivision, which is the Madison, and specifically the Madison to Reedsburg part of the Reedsburg subdivision. And this line is currently, the carload capacity is 263,000 pounds. And we have a specific policy to increase the carload capacity on the publicly owned lines, like the Madison to Reedsburg line, to 286,000 pound carload capacity. And when you consider that a typical rail car can weigh, the empty weight is about 100,000 pounds, increasing your gross carload capacity to 286 from 263 effectively raises the carrying capacity of that car 15-20%. Now, on the ground, what that means is increasing the capacity of bridges, and we have several bridges on the Reedsburg subdivision that are in the process or are soon planned to be enhanced to 286,000 pound carload capacity, including the Merrimack Bridge, which is a very important bridge that crosses Lake Wisconsin, and that I believe that project is even listed in our project list in the state rail plan. So these kinds of policy, the policy to increase the subdivision, our state-owned rail lines to 286 capacity, what that effectively will mean down the road is what we call it'll enable a mode shift, shifting freight from highways to rail in many localized circumstances like the Reedsburg subdivision, because we're investing and we have this policy to increase that carload capacity. It really does take trucks off the road, that freight off the road, and puts it onto rail. And there's one shipper in Reedsburg, one business in particular, a transloading business that has told us that they're going to double their carloads in 5 years from 1,000 today to over 2,000 annual carloads. And they've indicated they're going to make that shift, and that we think will take 3,000 trucks off the road per year from that one business alone. That one business based in Reedsburg. So I think I answered the question. That was kind of long-winded, but it's just an example of how our policies and the tools we have can lead to mode shift from highway to railroad. And that concludes my answer. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions related to that too. Thank you.
Our next question is, are there stops in Racine and Kenosha for the TCMC?
This is Lisa. I can take that question. So the TCMC will be stopping at the same stops as the Hiawatha and the Empire Builder. So there will be a stop in Sturtevant. So run along on the same rail line there on the CP. So that's the closest to Racine or Kenosha the TCMC will stop at. That's it.
While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I just wanted to remind attendees that if you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. Our next question is, are there opportunities to develop more rails to trails or rails with trails in Wisconsin?
This is Lisa. I can take that question. So a few but in the 80s and 90s, I think there was a lot of conversion of old rail lines to trails. Since then, the rail industry, especially the freight rail industry, has been growing, and there's been fewer and fewer abandonments. There's really most of the rail lines you see right now in Wisconsin are active, and for the most part, there's growth on those lines. So the expansion of rails to trails is pretty limited. There are some endpoints or maybe some small portions of some of the low volume lines that might have some minimal opportunity to go rails to trails. As far as rails with trails, that for a freight rail line is very challenging. You're trying, and it's something that is discouraged by both Wisconsin DOT and the railroad industry and operators. There's a real challenge in trying to combine a recreational use with an industrial transportation operation in a way that is safe for both the recreational users and of the trail and the railroad operators. So those opportunities, I think, are even more restricted and a bigger challenge. That's the end of my answer.
Our next question is, have there been widespread reliability issues with the Siemens locomotive fleet?
This is Rich, and I'm happy to take that question. I would say today, not so much, but I think we're now in the actually maybe in the middle of the 6th year of the arrival of the first Siemens chargers to the Midwest fleet, and definitely was the case in the first couple of years of the once the first 20 chargers were in, they had problems with the brakes, they had problems with intake of cottonwood seeds in the spring and late spring, early summer, and also there were a couple of winters when light powdery snow was causing some problems with the regenerative brakes. And there's also some minor things were happening in those first few years. But there's been a lot of learning by Siemens and Amtrak's maintenance folks in Chicago. And the reliability is now coming in better than the General Electric P42s that the chargers are replacing. And they seem to be getting better and better. I will say, so that's for the Siemens, the Midwest fleet. Now there's also, Amtrak owns some long distance models of the Siemens locomotives, and they've had some growing pains with that as well. Amtrak rolled them out on just 3 of their long distance lines, one of which was the Empire Builder. And they did have some troubles getting over the Rockies. I understand that the software was not properly calibrated to run over the Rockies. There was some other climate-related hardware issues that have since been resolved, and I anticipate that they'll go through a learning process on additional, climate and temperature conditions for those long distance chargers. So 2 different fleets. Amtrak owns a growing Siemens locomotive fleet, and then of course we own, the Midwest states own 33 Siemens charger locomotives, and I would say, that Midwest fleet is getting more and more reliable as both Siemens and the Amtrak maintenance folks learn about them, and I believe they're probably at least 20% more reliable than the P42s. But again, time will tell. And again, I'm happy to take a follow-up question if need be, and that concludes my answer.
Our next question is, how has the response been for the initial passenger station location in Madison? 6 possible locations were initially presented. Have the responses favored any 1 or 2 locations?
This is Lisa, and I can take this question. So although the route to a passenger rail service to Madison from Milwaukee and then connected into the 1 or 2 of the routes to the Twin Cities is in our 2030 plan and 2050 plan, the current activity and studies that are being done in the Madison area or on that line are really being led locally by the city of Madison with support from Amtrak. My understanding is that with the 6 locations, the city is really looking at trying to find the data on working with Amtrak to find the data on what would be, the best location for rider convenience and also a trip time for the actual train route. But at this point, at the state level, we are not actively involved in the station location study. So there, I don't have a specific comment on that, and so the department doesn't have a preference at this point on one or over the other or one of the 6. But we'll, if this project does become something more, then at that point we would become involved. But at this point, it's a city and Amtrak led study, and that's the best I can answer at this time. That's my
Our next question is, will proposed new passenger rail routes use the reduction of car traffic and its related pollution in planning the new service?
This is Lisa, and I can take this question again. So as the department looks at the routes that it supports in as well as the existing routes, the Hiawatha and the one that we're working on now, doing the TCMC to the Twin Cities, that is an important factor, looking at a reduction of car traffic and the air quality impacts to that. So that is part of the evaluation that is done, both for continuing existing service or expanding existing service to additional round trips, or expanding the service to additional station locations throughout the state. So yes, that's the end of my answer.
Our next question is, will the Rhinelander to Goodman and Park Falls to Ashland lines be reopened?
This is Rich. I'll take this question. So a little background for everybody. The Rhinelander to Goodman and Park Falls to Ashland lines are now owned by Watco and operated by the Fox Valley and Lake Superior Rail System. They had been owned by CN from 2001 until January of 2022. And the Rhinelander to Goodman line has been out of service since, I want to say, roughly 2007, 2008, and is now a bit overgrown with vegetation because it's been out of use. My understanding that there might be a bridge out of service on that line too. And that's, if I remember correctly, I think it's about 55 or 60 miles. Park Falls to Ashland went out of service in 2016 due to some washouts of track and bridges, especially in the Mellon area. And it's from an economic basis, it's a tough call to reopen those lines without sufficient business to justify the expense of reopening them. So we don't know when they're going to be reopened, but we know that Watco is studying reopening both lines, primarily to move pulp logs and pulp logs to pulp and paper mills, as well as dimensional logs for dimensional lumber. But I would say stay tuned, and we'll know more in the coming years as Watco gets its feet under it, and that the new operator, the Fox Valley and Lake Superior Rail System. That concludes my answer.
Our next question is, how much active railroad in Wisconsin is publicly owned?
This is Rich again. I'll take this question. The state of Wisconsin and other public entities own about 620 miles of active railroad in Wisconsin. That vast majority of it, roughly 600 miles, is in the southern counties, from the Metro Milwaukee on the east all the way to the Mississippi River and Prairie du Chien. And that's operated by Wisconsin and Southern Railroad. The state started acquiring those lines in roughly 1980 as a result of the Milwaukee Road bankruptcy and liquidation. And the state also owns roughly 20 miles in Washburn County, from Spooner to Hayward Junction, and that is operated by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad. There are other public entities that own small amounts in from Fitchburg to Oregon and Brooklyn in Dane County. Also, a little bit in New London. There's a mile in New London. And the Port of Milwaukee owns a fair number of miles at its port in the city of Milwaukee. I'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions to that. Not a whole lot of folks know about the public ownership. And that concludes my answer.
While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I want to remind attendees that if you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. Our next question is, how much input does Wisconsin DOT have with Amtrak as far as service reliability and standards?
This is Lisa. I can take that question. So we have a lot of input into what Amtrak provides as far as on the state-supported services. For a state-supported service, basically we contract with Amtrak and we work with them to determine what the state or states with the Hiawatha. It's a joint Wisconsin and Illinois supported service, and the TCMC will be Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois together. So we work with them and contract with them to provide the service. On the long distance routes, there's a lot less input from the states. I mean, we can provide our comments and what we'd like to see, or if we have some ideas, but those are run by Amtrak, so we have a lot less actual input. But for the state-supported routes, we can ask for the type of equipment we want, the routes. It kind of depends on, as far as frequency, we have to work with the host railroad and what they'll allow. So within those frameworks, the state has a lot of sway in how the service is provided. But of course, as I was mentioning, you have to work within whatever is available for equipment and whatever frequencies are available on the host railroad lines. I'm happy to answer any follow-ups as well. That concludes my answer.
Our next question is, why are not higher speed trains being considered when looking at new projects being implemented? Minnesota is looking at a 90-mile-per-hour service for the Duluth line. Michigan is running a service at 110 miles per hour, and Illinois is also running a service at 110 miles an hour.
So this is Lisa. I can take the first answer to that. So what we're working within kind of the framework of the existing, the service of the freight rail lines as they are today. So we kind of have to balance that out and look at what is cost benefit and time travel benefits to the service. I would say that in our plan, we do look at increasing the Hiawatha train to 90 miles per hour. So that is we are evaluating that. But the cost to upgrade any of our lines to 110, as Michigan and Illinois have done, just isn't within our current budget, or benefit cost analysis doesn't make it something we're going to currently be pursuing. I don't know, Rich, if you have any additions you'd like to make to that, or.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is increasing your track speed from 79 miles an hour, which is allowed under the FRA's Class 4 track. The difference, the level of improvements needed from the Class 4 to the Class 6 track, which allows 110 mile per hour speeds, is pretty enormous. Not just for track geometry, but also crossings and bridges. So it comes with a pretty big price tag that some states can afford and can justify with the benefit cost. And certainly for the Hiawatha, we're studying it, and then for TCMC, because of the amount of mileage in Wisconsin, I think the price tag would be well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. That concludes my answer.
While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I want to remind attendees that if you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. Our next question is, why are seats not reserved on the Hiawatha?
This is Lisa. I can take that question. So currently on the Hiawatha, the seats are reserved because of the short consist. Historically, they were unreserved because there was a lot of commuter and multi-riders that would buy, kind of not quite monthly tickets, but a group of tickets. And so it worked better to be unreserved at that point. At this point, we're continuing with reserve service for the time being, and we'd be evaluating whether to go unreserved in the future or to continue reserve service. So that is our current status.
While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I wanted to remind the attendees that there are approximately 10 minutes left in today's public session. If you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen, then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. While we wait for additional questions from webinar participants, I wanted to remind attendees that there are just 5 minutes left in today's webinar session. If you are ready to provide a question to our rail plan experts, please join the podium by clicking the Join the Podium button on the right side of your screen. Then submit your question into the chat box. Your question will be addressed in the order submitted. The time is 4:30 p.m., so we've reached the conclusion of today's webinar. On behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, thank you for your questions and for joining WisDOT today to discuss the draft Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050. Have a great day.